Attenuating a digital signal, i.e. turning it down, is not as easy as you may think unless you're working in some sort of DSP environment, and a dedicated hardware monitor controller can mean unnecessary stages of conversion and therefore loss of quality. So if your signal path from DAW to monitor speaker is entirely digital, as ours is here, what are the options?
You could opt for a software solution such as Ground Control Room if you're working in stereo, and Sphere if you're working in Dolby Atmos. We reviewed Ground Control Room on this channel back in December 2021 and we were really impressed. If you want hardware control, you can couple this with a generic programmable controller such as a loop deck, which offers an elegant solution. And I recorded some videos for Ginger Audio, the developers of Ground Control, earlier this year. So check out their channel and their website to see those videos. The link is in the description.
So that's a great option, but the downside for my ancient analog brain is that it's another piece of software I've got to worry about and another piece of generic hardware I've got to install and manage. And I'm a firm believer in the mantra that the simplest way is always the best. So with 16 channels of AES going from Mac to interface to Trinnov to monitors, it makes sense for me to have a controller that controls either the AES interface or the Trinnov and never does anything else. For those who watched our live stream on Dolby Atmos, you'll know that an option we looked at for the AES interface was the Focusrite RedNet D16R. This would give 16 channels of AES into our Trinnov MC Pro, and we could then control volume, speaker switching and get headphone output by adding the Focusrite R1 RedNet controller. Except, turns out, actually, we couldn't, because the Focusrite RedNet R1 RedNet controller doesn't actually control any Focusrite RedNet interface, past or present, unless you have a Focusrite Red interface on the Dante network. So that begs the question, why didn't they call it the RedNOTNet R1? So okay, let's make a compromise, ditch the D16R in favour of the Red Line 16, which will work with the RedNOTNet R1 and will give us 16 analog outputs into the Trinnov. 2 stages of conversion we don't really want, but hey ho, converters are pretty good these days, especially at this massive price point. So we'll just have to compromise. With the 16 outputs of the Red Line 16, we can set up a 9.1.4 system and have the R1 take care of the headphone and, more importantly, volume duties. And this is why it pays to do your research before investing thousands of pounds in products, even from the same manufacturer, that it would be reasonable to assume might just work. The Red Line 8 has 8 outputs, the Red Line 16 has 16 outputs, and what's the maximum number of channels we can control with the R1? 12.
I can't wait to see all of those producers' stupid, confused faces.
So I can turn down the LCR sides, wides and rears whilst the 4 height channels continue unrestrained at full volume. Fantastic. Now, I've loved Focusrite as a brand for decades. Their interfaces have always been rock solid and incredibly good value, and their superb A to D and D to A conversion has often slipped under the radar. It's always been amongst the very best out there. But to come out with an 8 and 16 channel interface solution and a controller specifically for that controls 12 channels, really, come on guys.
So we've sadly ditched Focusrite entirely as an option and are looking to British brand Sonifex for a Dante to AES interface that will give us 16 digital channels straight into the Trinnov for around half the price of the D16R. So the sensible option was for us to look to Trinnov for a volume control. Enter LaRemote, or LaRemote as we've affectionately named him. This is a purpose-designed and built controller for any Trinnov unit in their Pro Audio range and will work with the ST2 Pro, Demon, MC Pro and the new Nova, and connects to the host unit via USB. In its most basic guise, it acts as a simple volume control with what is quite simply the finest physical volume knob we've ever encountered, controlling the attenuation within the DSP of the Trinnov itself. This knob is magnetically detented and feels fantastic with a hefty weight to it. You can adjust the amount each click will control from half a decibel to 6 dB increments. And you can also enable acceleration, so the faster you turn the dial, the larger the increment. There's also a dedicated mute button on the unit that mutes all the channels simultaneously and lights up red when engaged. Various pages of control are accessible using the select dial, and these functions can vary depending on which model of Trinnov you're using. In this example, we'll be showing you the functionality you can expect with the MC Pro. The first page is the monitoring page. This tells you what source and preset are currently selected, and the push buttons laid down each side of the screen give you control over a user configurable reference level, bypass, which bypasses the Trinnov optimizer entirely, dim, and the ability to solo the left and right speakers independently. Page 2 shows you input meters, and page 3 the output meters. Page 4 is the speakers page and gives you greater control over soloing and muting of individual speaker channels. Pressing the bottom left button on the unit switches between mute and solo mode, and the buttons to the side of the screen then either mute or solo the selected channels. Page 5 enables us to switch between any presets we've programmed into the unit, and page 6 gives us control over the digital I/O profiles. Page 7 opens up access to the network controls, and page 8 gives us control over the clock and sample rate settings. Finally, page 9 controls the optimizer screen, allowing us to switch on and off different optimization settings: the acoustics correction, level alignment, delay alignment, as well as 2D and 3D remapping controls. But what if your Trinnov is in a server rack in a machine room, as many are? Well, if this is the case, you're likely to have the Trinnov connected to the computer running your DAW via the network, using the Trinnov app to control it. And in this situation, you can simply plug LaRemote into a spare USB socket on the computer running your DAW and control the Trinnov remotely. If you're using the unit with a daemon, you can also access extra features such as being able to customize your own layouts, and there's also a built-in TalkBack microphone that can show up as a USB microphone in your DAW. So all in all, a well thought out and premium feeling solution. But every silver lining usually has a cloud, so what are the bad points? Mark?
Remember that old Nokia mobile phone you sent off for recycling in 2003? Yep, well, this is where the screen ended up. There's really only one word to describe the screen, and that is, what's French for shit?
La merde.
La merde. When I first turned the unit on, I was actually expecting to be greeted with a game of Snake, but sadly not. And this really is the main downside of the unit for me. The screen is pretty much unreadable at any angle from which you might have the unit placed on a desktop, but that's not really an issue anyways. You have to peer over it from above to read the tiny text. And that's my second screen gripe, the way in which the text and buttons are laid out. They don't line up. There are these wispy screen printed trails you have to follow to remind yourself of which button is performing which function, at least until you've been using the unit for a while and muscle memory kicks in, with the text showing each function all crammed into the bottom third of the screen. Not ideal. And that means that for anything more than just basic volume control, mute, dim, and the occasional switch of a preset, I actually go into the Trinnov app when I need to delve into the features a little deeper. And that would be fine if the unit cost around £250, around the same as the Apogee hardware remote, for example, but it doesn't. It costs 4 times that at just under £1,000 in the UK. And for such a premium price tag on such an otherwise premium feeling product, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a colour OLED or TFT display and software that lines up with the buttons. Either that or just ditch the screen and 90% of the functionality altogether and just give us a volume knob with a mute and dim button and bring it in at a couple of £100. And extra features like being able to load your own studio logo onto the display might sound appealing, but they don't really mean anything if it looks crap and you can't see it anyway. Other disadvantages are that if you're changing the volume with the Trinnov in bypass, there will be a short gap in your audio in between each increment of the dial, but this is inherent to the Trinnov itself and not just down to Larry. The unit also stays powered on if directly connected via USB to the rear of the host Trinnov, at least in our case. And I'm the kind of guy that likes to power everything off at the end of the day now I haven't got the inrush current of 11,000 capacitors in a large format console to worry about. So this simply means that the host unit also needs powering off at the wall, or Larry needs the USB cable pulling out of his bum at the end of the day.
But disappointing screen aside, this has turned out to be a solid and reliable unit, and as with any Trinnov product, customer service when we've needed it has been impeccable. our MC Pro needed a software update in order to recognise Larry when we first plugged him in, and an email sent to UK distributor emerging at 9 AM on a Monday was replied to within just 10 minutes, and the software update was being remotely enabled over the internet from Trinnov HQ before we even had a chance to reply. So all in all, a good experience, and even Mark will admit that he wouldn't be without Larry now after having used him for a good few months. If you're running an entirely digital signal chain and have Trinnov room optimization, then this is probably the most efficient, reliable, and sonically transparent way to get superb control over your monitoring levels. Thanks very much for watching. Please consider hitting the subscribe button and dinging the ding dong to be notified of future videos if you haven't already, and you'll see us in the next one.